Hi there, thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Taste with Sherry, where we're saving the earth one flavor at a time by gathering community to share wisdom around the natural connections between our innate sense of taste and flavors that are grown in healthy regenerative soils. Welcome. Hey there, Sherry Hess here at The Flavor Remedy. I am so excited today. I've been talking about this. I've been talking about wanting to bring experts onto the show. And today I have a really, really exciting expert to bring onto the show and talk to you about nutrition in soil and flavors. Like, we are going to get right down to the nitty gritty and prove this straight up that flavor equals nutrients. So I have my friend Rod Tyler here, the inventor of Garden Soxx. And those of you that know me personally know that I have experience with Garden Soxx. I've been a lifelong gardener. My dad was a farmer, and growing food has just always been a thing for me. And last year I was so excited to find Garden Soxx as this beautiful solution to being able to grow food, even if you don't have land or soils and all the things, all the headaches that people presume that come with growing food. So welcome, Rod. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be on your show.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. So, okay, let's give our listeners a quick rundown of how and why you created these cool things called Garden Soxx.
Well, it's, when you do something for 30 years, you're an overnight success, right? So after working with compost in my early years, I've been using compost and marketing compost for over 30 years.
Compost is cool, by the way.
Yes, that's right. And in doing that, I found that when I did my deep bed garden and put all the compost in there, I had phenomenal results, just phenomenal results. But what a lot of people don't know is that when you add compost to soil, the weed seeds that are in the soil grow really, really good. And so when you go away for a weekly vacation in the summer, you get back and you're on the back of the hamster wheel just trying to chase out the weeds. So I started playing around in the early 2001 timeframe in taking compost and putting it into a mesh tube called a sock. And we ended up calling those obviously Garden Soxx. And we kind of did, thousands of experiments with what grew better. And we led to the point where we could get these little modular 2-foot sections of Garden Soxx that were kind of like little playful Lincoln logs for gardens.
That's
and
awesome.
You could design them in any shape or size. And so that's kind of how it started.
That's awesome. And I there's so much science behind what you've created, right? Yeah. And I love that because I remember when we first spoke, I kind of found you through this thread of an amazing movie called The Need to Grow, right? And I know that you had a big part in that movie, right? And so I'm so grateful for that connection and that link. But when we actually spoke on the phone, we talked for a really long time about my idea, right? This is over a year ago, before I even started doing this podcast or bringing this information to light. We talked a lot about this idea of flavor and nutrients, right? And now I talk about, flavor, saving the earth one flavor at a time. And that's really this thread of where I'm, bringing this very intentional conversation around flavor. But what I loved about that day that we talked was you have studies.
Yes.
Right. So you did these comparison studies between growing things in Garden Soxx, which is pure compost, which that's like unique in and of itself, right? Most people think that compost is an addendum to soil. And but you are just growing in compost. So you went down this road with all of your knowledge and wisdom around compost, and you did reports, right, about the comparison of how things were grown in Garden Soxx versus other things. And it wasn't just about the soil, but also like, I think you called it water, like the ability to hold water and let it drain and all those things. But talk to me about these reports that you got a little bit, because in my mind, this completely justifies everything that I'm talking about, right? Flavor equals nutrition. So
it does. It does indeed.
Help me prove my point, Sir Rod.
It's kind of funny, but when you've been in the industry this long, we go to annual meetings for the U.S. Composting Council, and a good friend of mine, Pat Milner from USDA, invited me down to Beltsville, Maryland, which is the oldest research station for agriculture in the United States. And she said, hey, I'd like to take a look at these Garden Soxx. I said, okay, what do you want to do? She's want to grow some strawberries and measure them against the conventional matted row system, which is just straw, and fumigated methylbromide plasticulture, which is the majority of the way strawberries are grown. So for those of you that don't know, most of the strawberries are grown as an annual. They're planted, they're torn out every year.
Wow.
Okay. Unfortunately, that's not the nature of the strawberry plant. The nature of the
Right, it's a
strawberry
perennial, right?
plant is a perennial. It's a vine. Okay.
Wow.
You know, the natural ones you see in the woods, those are vining all over the place. But long story short, they did the tests and they came up with a dramatic difference in Garden Soxx compared to the two leading production methods, including anywhere between 2 times and 11 times more pounds of fruit, which is kind of staggering, really.
Right.
And that doesn't even include our ability to crowd those plants tighter than what USDA says. But the nutritional stuff that they found out was really, really mind-blowing, because we had things like the things that you taste and what you represent with your show here, which is so great. You taste the sweetness, okay? That's a sugar. We had a higher sugar content for all 3 types of sugar. We had a higher citric acid, which gives you the tartness or the sourness. And you know, those two together give you that great taste.
Yes.
But to see the data from USDA was extremely humbling. It
Yeah.
really was.
Oh my gosh, I have chills. That is the coolest stuff. So, you know, in the vernacular and the language that I use on this show is we talk about these categories of flavor, right? And how each category of flavor in and of itself is providing, you know, support to our bodies. I use the word nutrition, and we can kind of, you know, play with that word and look at specific things. Like, I know the report talks about antioxidants and sugars and acids and things, right? So we can kind of break it apart. But what I love about what you just said is that the strawberry, as it's grown, is not just sweet alone, right? It's sweet and it's sour. And there's also measurements of these antioxidants, which can show up as potentially even bitter or astringent, right? So the fact that you're measuring these things and you're putting the, you know, the tags of what we do call nutrition, so fructose, sucrose, you know, citric acid, which that word is one of those words that can be completely bastardized, right? Because citric acid in an ingredient is not coming from a strawberry, right? We're not allowed to know that, or we're not really educated around that. But so cool. So you have this report that says things grown in Garden Soxx, which is pure compost, are showing up sweeter, more sour, more antioxidants, right? It's so cool. It's so cool to see it that way.
So there's some more stuff even better than that. In our bodies, we have things called free radicals. And so a lot of the discussion around antioxidants is to get the free radicals to be absorbed or taken down so that we are able to get rid of the free radicals. And they do think that some of the anthocyanins and some of the other values actually can be a little bit of an anti-carcinogenic. So it's pretty exciting to think about eating organic food. And one of the folks that was in the Need to Grow, Eric Cutter, has gone on to create a term, the pharmacy, which is FARMACY.
Yes.
And what he's trying to do is he's trying to say that when you eat good food, you're actually at the pharmacy, and you can get off of the drugs and to get onto the good whole foods that we eat.
Yes.
When you look at one of the constituents that was measured was ORAC, ORAC, and it stands for oxygen radical absorption capacity. Garden Soxx was 25% higher. Wow. Although that's not in the flavor profile that you're tasting, that's what the flavor profile is doing for your health benefit. So that is the pharmacy.
So talk to me about that. So are you saying that those other components of what have been measured that can be like translated into flavor are contributing to this being a higher number?
Yeah, there's always a correlation there from the data that we've seen. And as we got this data back, you know, we had grown up to that point probably the top 20 vegetables in our Soxx. And then we went on to grow as many as 300 vegetables in our Soxx. And just, I can tell you from personal experience that we did not have the money to go back to USDA to do studies for, tomatoes and arugula and all these other things. But when you pick this stuff and it's out of the Garden Soxx, and you can see, for instance, we grew asparagus, and when you pick the asparagus just right out, it would just start dripping down your arm full of juice, just ridiculous amount of moisture and goodness. And also some other interesting combinations of the acidity and the sweetness of tomatoes is accentuated.
Right.
If you think about strawberries, is the number one fruit crop that's grown in America, okay? But then you have your other top 10, you have your squash, your lettuce, your cucumbers. We just found every single thing we grew was more tender, juicier, and just tasted better.
And this is part of like where I want this language to go to, is that, we don't all have access to USDA reports. We also, and this is a big part of the conversation I have too, is we as humans, when we're experiencing our sense of taste, it's the only sense that requires us to make a choice, right? And when we make a choice and we step out of our bodies, we start researching, we start looking up USDA things, we start looking at what do these sugars mean? And we our brains get in the way of this choice, as opposed to, like, imagine if we could just let flavor be that measurement, right? If we could start talking about, even the levels of bitterness in food and how that correlates to detoxification. And if we could look at this spectrum of flavor in a tomato or a strawberry or asparagus or anything grown on the pharmacy that Eric Cutter is doing, right? Like I so loved his stories too. The stuff he grew on that show was unbelievable. Like kale plants the size of trees, right? If we could use flavor, if we could trust our bodies enough to recognize that flavor is actually like this, a way that we can determine the nutrition, that's the whole goal here, right? If we could just elevate this concept of, okay, I don't have to research and understand what every antioxidant and every level of sugars and I don't have to have that wisdom to know that this tastes delicious.
Isn't that exactly how we evolve?
Yes, that's why we have
take
taste
away
buds.
The grocery store, and that's how we evolved, right?
Exactly. It really, really is. And it's this journey of food that we've been on, and we've just kind of come to this place where you just expect a tomato to be hard and tasteless because we're told it's a tomato, right?
Oh, can we talk about that for a minute?
Yes, let's talk about the dear tomato story.
So there's a couple things. Genetically, there's two things that we discovered with USDA research that led to some really questions that are probably still not answered, but the genetic potential of whatever plant that we grow has not, in my opinion, really been fully challenged with any production system agronomically. Okay, so I'm an agronomist. I look at soil systems. I look at bare soil, putting compost with it. I look at pots. I look at Garden Soxx. And to me, the Garden Soxx is the first system that's actually challenged that genetic plant, whatever it is, an all-star or Chandler strawberry, whatever variety it is, to produce as much as it can per plant in the square area that it has, okay? But when you start talking about tomatoes and even some of these strawberries, they have not been bred in our culture now, besides being a GMO and other issues. They have not been bred for flavor or for nutrition.
Right.
If you get into the heirloom varieties, you're still getting some of those, but generally they're bred to ship 2,000 miles and stay on the shelf life for a week or two and still have good color. Okay, so they breed them for the color, but everything else, and they go for a thicker skin, they go for a lot of other things. So in playing around with this in my mind, I grew some Brandywine tomatoes.
I love Brandywines. They're my favorite.
And I had a cookout with hamburgers, and I shouted out when I got my burger, I walked down to the back deck and I said, "That's it." And everybody looked at me. We had hamburger fries almost every weekend, and they said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "It isn't the meat, it's the tomato."
Yes.
My God, I finally had a hamburger like my dad used to cook. It's the same darn ground beef we've been eating for years, but these are his tomatoes.
Yeah.
So that
huge.
You just listen to your taste, like you say, you're right on.
Yeah. And it seems so crazy. Like so many times I'm like, it's so obvious to me. Like it's so obvious. And that tomato reference, I have spoken those exact words that you have said, like in earlier shows and in, social media galore. Doing the comparison between the tomatoes is constantly what I'm doing. And I always say they're grown to go across the country. They're not grown for nutrition and flavor. So the fact that you're like almost Bill Nye the science guy and you have that much information around the soils and this is your background and your work, like it's so awesome to hear you say that and to keep that conversation going, because we're just letting flavor be insignificant, right? We are just rolling over and saying, okay, this tomato tastes like crap, so if I just put some ranch dressing on it, I can get it down. And we're not giving it that reverence, right? The importance and seeing this correlation between the flavor and the nutrition. So we're definitely going to put like little snippets of your report into this video so that people can see, right, these comparisons and see those numbers and see the visuals of how things, are actually showing up in these reports. So tell me what you think. How do you think we can raise this conversation, this awareness? Like, how can we bring this importance of flavor in the forefront of conversation around these topics?
Well, I think that there's some of that going on now with the farm to table movement. And if the farm to table movement is including flavorful varieties and choices of seeds that are, for instance, heirloom, right, I think we're getting some of that. I remember eating in a restaurant in Syracuse, New York, and it was one of the most incredible meals I ever had. And I ended up talking to the chef for 2 hours, and he wanted to grow in Garden Soxx on his roof.
Nice.
I think your point about food deserts before was really, really on point. So many people have a challenge of timing for a restaurant, for instance, of timing the produce that they need for when they actually get it. And if they grow it and they run out, then they have to supplement with something else or change the menu suddenly. So at that particular restaurant, they just had it. When it ran out, you can have a hamburger.
Okay? Right. So going with seasonal menu items on a restaurant is a good way to just set that expectation for your clients, right?
Right. And so, but I think there's a lot of other things to consider with the flavor connection. I think one of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet, but I have a background in dairy farming, and I used to sell animal feeds. And so from a nutrition standpoint, I would come up with rations for cows, and both the heifers and the milk cows. And what I found was we could add a lot of sources of calcium to the ration. Limestone, for instance. Cows eat limestone. Do you think they're going to eat their feed as well as if you put something else that's a byproduct of a bone meal or something else that has calcium in it? So I think the term bioavailability needs to be discussed. Yes, as it's related to flavor. And with the data that we see from USDA, we obviously see that the bioavailability of some of these nutrients is 20 to 25% higher. And that means that strawberry that you're eating, 25% more nutrients come into your body, but you're linking that with your flavor. Okay. And so that becomes more bioavailable. Your antioxidants are more bioavailable. Your immune system is better because it has something to draw on for fighting off these antimicrobial and antioxidant properties to help you with your immune system. So I think the bioavailability is something that would be neat. There is someone I recently found out about, and I reached out to him, but they're working on a technology to have some type of a point and shoot type of a gun, kind of like a meter.
Is this the bionutrient guy, Dan Kittredge?
Yeah, I think I sent him to you.
Yes.
So if that ever hits, it's going to be amazing to see that power change how people shop, how they make choices. And that will completely transform immediately everybody to where, okay, we don't have enough food, so I think I'm just going to start my own CSA, or I'm going to start a roadside market, or I'm just going to grow for these 10 neighbors, and we're all checking our food.
Yeah. Oh my
That's a
God.
pretty big breakthrough. It's pretty big.
Yeah, it is huge. And yeah, I would love to get Dan on the show as well, because that device that he's creating, I've been actually following the bionutrient soil conference that he's had over the last, he kind of spread it out over months, right?
Right.
And I'm finding so much cool stuff in that conference, you know, all these brilliant farmers that are really working hard to improve the soils and talk about biology versus chemistry, right? We're so focused on making everything growing on chemistry when biology is the magic, and that's where everything grows better and is stronger. And when it's stronger, it brings flavor. Like, I love that. So you talked about bioavailability. So am I understanding correctly that that flavor component can also lead to being more bioavailable? Is that kind of where the connection
Yeah.
you're making there?
Yeah. Let me give you a concrete example. So if you feed, um, limestone to a cow, it basically is about 10% bioavailable. It just goes right out the other end. Okay.
Okay.
So on a nutrient report for a ration for what we eat or a cow eats or whoever eats, it shows up as 26% calcium, which is the daily requirement, et cetera, et cetera. It's not there. It goes right through your body. So I have a feeling that that is what is happening 99% of the time with us at the grocery store when we don't buy organic and we're buying these GMO crops that are probably not very bioavailable for us to harvest the nutrients, antioxidants, the flavonoids, the phenolics, all the things that we need.
Right.
They're just going right through our bodies. And
Right.
so I think there's another play there. And obviously it depends on the reaction once it's inside your body of how your, gut health is and everything else. But there's so many things that could be measured on a very, very quick test. One of the tests that's done for sugar, for instance, or sweetness, is called the BRIX test, BRIX. And even in the USDA study, we were about 15% higher on just a quick BRIX test. Okay. So knowing that that's there, that if it's higher, it has a greater chance of being higher bioavailability.
Yes, I love that. And the BRICS test is, thank you for bringing that up, because I totally wanted to talk about that too. That seems to be the only, kind of known measurement at this point that points directly to flavor, right? And I feel like there's so many more. And that's why I love this report that you have too, because you do look at the acidic, which in my language translates to sour, right? And these antioxidants, like I'm going to look up some of these elements and I'm going to guess that there's bitterness to it. And I know the anthocyanins that you just mentioned, I did some research on that, and that actually touches on a lot about the pigment and the color and the visuals, right? But there's more to it. There's actually this element of astringent that's tied to that. Right. So astringent is not one of my categories, but it's definitely an experience that we have on our flavors. So I just get so excited about this stuff. And when I think about, I'm kind of going to flash back for a minute here to Eric Cutter in the pharmacy, because this is what we can do. Like, this is why we have our taste buds. And if we can tune into even these subtleties of astringent, right? And these, sometimes I translate into a language of experiencing the elements on our taste buds, right? So like astringent is like almost like air, if I were to translate it to so it creates that coolness, or it opens up your lungs. Like there's more to the experience that we're actually tasting. So, my point is, if we can continue the language around almost tasting our medicine, right? Like, this is another part of what we've gotten so far away from, is allowing these flavors that have medicinal, detoxifying, antioxidant properties. They're speaking to us through flavor. They can speak to us through flavor. We don't have to be taking pills. We don't have to be, seeking the magic pill if we just listen to our taste buds and learn. Like, it takes learning, and it takes experiencing more flavors on our palate, right? Like opening our minds, allowing ourselves to taste a piece of kale and detect all the flavors, not just the part that's offensive to you, but the umami, there's protein, like a strong piece of kale, like that stuff that Eric Cutter grows, right? Guaranteed you're getting higher protein levels in that, right? It makes it more resistant to pests. It makes it stronger to grow, and it's more protein in our bodies. And that's a flavor, right? That's a flavor that we can learn to detect.
Well, and I think if you think about the the way people experience flavor, let's talk about their choices that they have right now. Okay, they have the grocery store, they have the organic section in the grocery store, which over the last 10 years has quadrupled. Why? Because people want more organic. But when you start looking at how long that stuff has been on the shelf, and then you compare those two options to picking it yourself, there were some wildly surprising discoveries when we grew all these 300 vegetables that I never had a clue how great asparagus was, picked right off the bed and eaten raw, not even cooking it.
Yeah.
And it didn't have any side effects.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Of course.
And so, so there's some things that you can pick and eat that are way different and way more nutritious, way more flavorful. And there's some other things that don't have that, you know, like a potato doesn't have that much of a difference compared to strawberries. Okay. And so there's some things that we did discover were just amazing. Any of the salads, the kale, the arugula, any of the collards, if you had collard greens, oh my gosh, the collard greens were the size of my head and just as tender as anything. Not super bitter, actually kind of sweet. So the profile does change when they're fresh and they're grown in organic.
Yes. So I love everything you just said, right? Because exactly what you just said, that you can even pick up a sweetness in these things, right? This is another part of expanding our language around flavor and our awareness, right? The awareness of what these things taste like, truly are experienced as, versus what we perceive about them too. We just recorded an episode yesterday about the perception of flavor and how that's a lot, right? There's a lot about what we expect when we eat something. So we expect when we eat asparagus that it's going to have whatever taste that you've had in the past, right? So there's this perception of what it's going to taste like. And then it's going to have this specific biological effect on your body too, right? So we all have this story. We have no idea that these other flavors and experiences are even out there and exist. And that's, you know, we can't experience every flavor in the world from a perfectly grown food, but wouldn't it be nice if we could, right?
Yeah, I think there's a couple other things to mention here that's appeals to your earlier comment about food deserts and how to get that to people. Obviously, we sell the Garden Soxx and we fill those locally and encourage people to get compost. You know, Eric Cutter is one of the few people that I use the term compost as a vanilla. That's the vanilla fill. And you can put all kinds of chocolate sprinkles on it. You can put foo-foo dust. You can put glacial rock dust with it if you want. And everybody that grows food has their own little enigma of adding something, calcium or whatever, to make this flavor good. What's different is that we've been able to increase the USDA standard 14,000 plants per acre to over 50,000 plants per acre in the Soxx, which is almost 3 times. And we don't have any drop in performance per plant, a pound of strawberries per plant. And we still have these results that we have from USDA. So from a production and how are we going to do this standpoint, I think our hope is that Garden Soxx will give an answer to people that want to have fresh food that's flavorful, because one standard 4x4 garden will grow over 100 pounds of food, about 80 to 100 pounds of food in a year. And so for a family of 2 or 4, that's a pretty good amount.
Yeah. And I love that. And I love, that's, like I said, that's why I originally bought the Garden Soxx, because I wanted to kind of play with it. And I wanted to see, you know, if this could be a solution, because when I first started jumping on the food bandwagon and really getting passionate about food and what was happening to food, and, you know, I always thought that the best possible thing that I could do as a person with the means to do so is to buy organic, because that way, the more we spend on organic, if we can afford it, the lower the price will come, right? I thought that was the best way to make it more accessible. And I think it has gotten better over the years, but I think the best way is what you're doing, right? Is creating a way to actually make it simpler for people to grow their own food and not have to be tied down time-wise with weeding and, you know, having the land and having the space and tilling the soils and growing your worms like I do, right? Like I do all the things because I love it, right? But not everybody has the time, wants to put the effort into it. So that's the beauty that I love about the Garden Soxx, is that it has this, right? It has this, it opens up doors for people to make it easier and more delicious, right?
Right.
So one quick question I have for you, and I I'm really curious about this idea of growing in compost alone. So talk to me about how you think that creates a better performance for the garden sock as opposed to mixing compost with soil. We've talked about the weeds, we've talked about you can grow more, we've talked about all those things, but why just compost?
Well, we started off doing it because for the experiments, we had a pile of compost there and we had some mesh. And I knew from using compost and adding it to soil what a pain in the neck that created for weeds. And if you don't tear out every last weed before it seeds and they reseed, you've got a bigger problem. And so, in looking at compost that's gone through the whole heating process, it kills, very important for your viewers to know, composting kills diseases like anthracnose or black root rot in strawberries, anything on your trees or limbs. It kills weed seeds and it kills insects and larvae. Okay, so those three pests are gone now. And if you use that, the weeds will not grow out of the garden socks because there's no weed seeds in there. You might have some blow into the holes that you have there, like a dandelion or something. So that's the first reason we picked it. The second reason was most of your compost, really your soil tests on those from an NPK standpoint, you're looking about a 1-1-1. Okay. So in that 1% nitrogen, you have 100%, 99% is organic nitrogen. Well, right now, where you are and where I am, it's not growing too much because it's cold outside.
Right.
So organic nitrogen does not release until you have moisture, temperature, and microbes. So you can pour water through it and it won't rinse out the nitrogen. Okay, so it's a very safe way to do it. We have less environmental pollution because we're not putting all this urea on like they do on the commercial farms. Okay, and so we just picked that media, and I had been using compost so much. I had grown in pots and 100% compost with the nursery, and I just never found really a reason to put cocoa peat or cocoa coir or anything with it because that just diluted the nutrients. Then I had to add more nutrients. So as an agronomist, as somebody that was told by a lot of people you can't do that, my answer is yeah, you can.
You proved them wrong. Well, and it just simplifies things, right?
It does.
So when you're and maybe this is, well, it's not theory because you've already proven it. So I guess my question is, would you say that because you're growing in exclusively in compost, do you think that contributes to those higher levels of nutrients and flavor?
Yeah, I absolutely think, compost is loaded with about a billion organisms per teaspoon. Okay, and
The
so
life, it's biology, right?
biology.
It's
And so
biology.
is really good soil. So when we first put these first compost socks out on our hoop house weed mat, in about 2 weeks I go out, we've got pill bugs, we have sow bugs, we have worms. I'm thinking to myself, how in the world are these guys? Well, they're all in around the edges of the sock. They're crawling in the top of the holes. We've got some worm castings now. There's worms in the sock. So it's really just a little container for everything to go on. But we've jump started everything so fast because we have a living soil.
Yes.
Okay. And that is what has been missing from most of the other store-bought brands. When you have 90% peat, peat is not very alive. Cocoa fiber is imported. It's got a bad carbon footprint. Peat's also imported, by the way, generally. And I just don't like some of those properties when they dry out. They get so hydrophobic that when you try to re-wet them, it is just takes so long. Compost doesn't have as bad of a hydrophobic property. It does get hydrophobic, but not anywhere near like it.
Hydrophobic. That's the word I was trying to think of when I was thinking about the water, right? That has to do
Yep.
with like things being water repelling off of things instead of being absorbed.
Right.
Oh my gosh, you just totally, like that bionutrient conference that I was telling you about, we talked about biology versus chemistry. That is what you just totally like proved with the idea of compost versus the NPK fertilizers that everybody thinks that they need to put onto their soils, right? Because it's alive. So you're talking about the chemistry and the biology. in the
It's all
compost.
of it. It's all of it. You know, if you go in the woods, all the organic matter is breaking down. Those nutrients are releasing all every day in the summer. Okay. Compost is releasing nutrients every day. Guess when your plant needs them? Every day. But they don't need all of it put on top of them in 5 different applications like your lawn care programs.
Right.
Okay. And so every day it's releasing and you're getting the nutrients every day. The other reason we wanted to use compost was very simply, if we really want to empower people to do this, they're not going to truck it in from Canada or from one central location. There's 4,000 compost facilities across the US.
Yeah.
You're close to one somewhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And if you can't get it there, you probably can go to Home Depot and they have their bags there. Okay, so it's not bad. You know, I have a couple different soil mixes that I use for container plants, for upright containers. And some of it is just adding a little bit of peat moss for moisture retention during hot weather and some perlite. If you just take compost and perlite, add it together, you're going to look at that and go, man, that's some of the nicest soil I've ever seen.
That's awesome.
So it's kind of a little secret.
That's awesome. I love that. This has been so great. Like, I keep saying this to my guests, and it's true. You're completely justifying my existence in so many different ways. Like, I just feel like so blessed to have you here, you know, on the show, talking about the things, making those connections. You know, what seems perfectly logical to me is it just, it's so cool to have the science, and you know, we come from these completely different stories, we've intersected, everything is lining up, it's a beautiful thing. Let's keep this flavor conversation going, huh?
Yeah, it sounds good.
So what I'm going to do too is we're going to follow a Garden Soxx journey this summer for sure. Have you back on the show at some point. We will definitely circle back, and if people have questions or anything for Rod, please let me know. We'll make that connection. We'll put a link to Garden Soxx under this episode so that people can find you and get a little discount and all that fun stuff. This has been so great. Thank you so much, and I look forward to having you back again sometime soon.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity and all you do with trying to make the connection. I don't think there's enough people trying to pass your message out. So when I first saw it, I thought I need to get linked up with you. This is a great message. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Awesome. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic day.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.